Welcome to the Retaining WIT podcast. I'm Jossie Haynes.
And I'm Jordanna Kwok.
This show tackles the challenges of keeping women in tech.
Each episode, we discuss current events, experiences in the industry, and what it takes to create a workplace where women will thrive.
Today on the Retaining WIT podcast, we're very excited to be chatting with Ruthann Weeks, founder of Harmony in the Workplace. Ruthann is a tireless, forward-thinking crusader whose efforts have helped to bring the importance of an abuse-free work environment to the forefront of public awareness. One of her areas of expertise is how to recognize and respond to neurodiversity at work. Given that research shows 15 to 20% of the population is neurodiverse, we need to learn how to support our neurodiverse employees in tech. And I thought she'd be an amazing resource to have on our show. Thank you, Ruthann, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I'm really passionate about raising awareness around this topic in the workplace.
Yeah, thank you, Ruthann. It's really nice to meet you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your role as a people and culture strategist.
Yeah, sure, Jordanna. Thank you for the question. I founded my business in 2016, having found myself unexpectedly unemployed after getting bullied from my job in the nonprofit sector. I had joined a new team that had a couple of people retire, and they brought me into a middle management position. It was the next sort of progress in my career path. And I was really excited about the new opportunity, really passionate about bringing my best to that place of employment. And unfortunately, it didn't take me long to discover that it was not a very good fit. It was a very rigid and authoritative leadership management style, and I did not thrive there. I was director of a team, and my team and I, we got along great. There was a peer director who wasn't involved in hiring me, who didn't really take the time to get to know me, yet made lots of assumptions about me. And she had been working with the leader, the executive director, for a number of years. And unbeknownst to me, things started to happen behind closed doors that affected my position there. Things like I suggested moving some files to archives and got accused by this peer director of wanting to destroy files. So basically what happens is when you find yourself in that position, you start being afraid to speak up, to say anything that is going to be misconstrued. You're someone new, you're trying to find your fit, you're trying to, just bring value to the team. But when you don't have that level of psychological safety to share and be your authentic self, it really erodes your sense of well-being. And that was certainly what happened to me. So basically, I'll never really know what was said. It happened, like I said, behind closed doors, but I got fired from that job. And I know I didn't do anything to deserve to get fired. And although I was devastated because this was my shiny new opportunity, I was also relieved because I knew it was a bad fit. I knew the environment was toxic and I wouldn't thrive there. And now my hand was forced to make a change.
Wow. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your story. I really appreciate that. And I think sometimes we say, bad opportunities or what seems like potentially a bad thing can turn into an amazing opportunity. And I think the amount of help you're able to give the world now in your new business is most likely much more game changing than what you could have done in that role. So, always looking at the potential gift there. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. And going back to the topic that we started our conversation with is there's been a lot more visibility around the subject of neurodiversity. But I think that there's still some folks who may not be clear what exactly is meant by that. So can you share a little bit by when somebody says they're neurodiverse or what that means?
Yeah, I think there's actually a lot of misconceptions about it, Josie. What people, people have a perception, but they may not really know. And I know just digging into this topic and doing some research, I learned a lot. Neurodiversity is a diversity of human minds. So it's the infinite variation in neurocognitive function within our species. It's a biological fact. That definition is from Dr. Nick Walker, and they have an amazing study into neurodiversity and how to accommodate it and what that looks like and how that shows up. To be neurodivergent is having a mind that functions in a way which diverges significantly from the dominant societal standards of normal. And I'm putting normal in quotation marks because normal is just a setting on the dryer. We really prefer to use the word diverse. There is no normal. There's just differences, right? And really just to get rid of that word and toss it out. And instead of maybe the word normal, let's use the word typical, right? Because, we mentioned that 15 to 20% of the population has a neurodivergent condition. And at that point, it's not so much normal or abnormal as just being maybe less typical. What I'm hearing from neurodivergent folks is that the word typical is less ableist and more inclusive.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I had not been aware of that, and I really appreciate thinking about that from the typical point of view. It definitely feels much more inclusive. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and this topic is certainly very top of mind. I had a friend of mine, a former colleague, reach out about this particular topic in the workplace. And so I'm curious how hiring neurodiverse employees actually can benefit employers.
Well, first of all, the DEI efforts that we're being quite intentional about these days. We really, we tend to think about race relations when we talk about diversity and inclusion. And although that is a very, very important part of it, there's other areas as well, right? People with different ways of thinking, people with disabilities, people, genders, and just the way that we think about diversity is just, it's important to think about other aspects. So when it comes to neurodiverse folks and having them as part of your team, let's just talk about autism. Autism is just one area of neurodiversity. ADHD, there's a whole bunch of them that, we can talk about, touch on, but let's just talk about autistic folks. So they may have a mindset that they can see patterns and make connections that are less obvious to some of us more neurotypicals. They're big picture thinkers or deep thinkers. They're often visual thinkers. And again, I just want to caveat this that we can't put people in boxes ever. If there's anything that is static about neurodivergence, it's that there is no sameness within the neurodivergent sector. So they can be very, very detail oriented. They can pick out things that might be missed by other people on the team. They have remarkable memory for certain details. Some of them have eidetic memories. They can be very literal, logical, and articulate, serious and matter of fact in nature. They may experience a misalignment when interpreting what others are thinking, but that can also reveal different ways to think about things, right? And we want as many different perspectives at the table as possible. And quite often, people that have autism are very, very smart, brilliant in certain areas, but they might be a little less aware when it comes to social norms, societal social norms, and that can definitely come up in the workplace.
Absolutely. And so thank you for sharing those insights. And let's say employers really have learned from this the value of hiring and thinking about having more folks who identify as neurodiverse. And so when thinking about that interviewing and hiring process, what are some areas that leaders can be more inclusive?
When it comes to hiring and even just the interview process, it can be extremely anxiety inducing for neurodivergent folks. And one of the best ways to accommodate that is to provide them with the questions ahead of time, give them time to formulate their answers, give them space. Don't make any quick or sudden changes to the interview. Give them time to formulate their answers, like I said, and, really just set them up for success, right? We want to bring them onto the team, perhaps, and we need to accommodate their differences, but also celebrate their differences. So really, when it comes to that type of thing, we want to provide an opportunity to attend in person, perhaps, or over the telephone, or even on Zoom. What we find with neurodiverse folks is that they quite often will not want their cameras on because they just find that as an added layer of distraction when they're trying very hard to stay focused on the task at hand. They want to put their best foot forward, of course, like anybody in an interview process, and really, just accommodating them. Ask them. The best way to really accommodate anyone in the workplace is to ask them. Ask them what they need. And, we talk about in HR, we talk about accommodation up to the point of undue hardship. Well, is it really an accommodation, or is it just an inclusive practice? And really, the best people to tell you what they need are those folks themselves.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing some of these tips. I know that oftentimes employers will ask, and especially recruiters who are connecting with candidates, what would you need in order for the interview to be successful? And I really appreciate that. And something that I've been thinking about as a hiring manager myself is, if I give the candidate an option, especially in tech, a take-home exercise where they can actually really sit down and think about it versus on the spot thinking. I know that's been contentious, but it definitely does sound like giving the option might be perhaps the best approach.
Yeah, Jordanna, you're hitting that right on the head. And not only in the interview process, but even, once they have the job and they're on the team, they would prefer, what I'm hearing is they would prefer to take some time to process meeting information and process a problem, and rather than even try to articulate it verbally within the framework of a meeting, to be given that time to type out a response and email a response. And that helps them to formulate their ideas. If there's any main takeaway here, it's that they can't pivot. They can't pivot on a dime. They need time to process things. And really, the best gift we can give them is that time, and to pause a beat and just to give their brilliance a chance to formulate and to work, and give them an opportunity to really just dig into something in their mind and work it through. And even when it comes to things that neurotypicals don't struggle with, like when it comes to things like social activities within the workplace, we really want to give them lots of warning that these things are coming up. On Friday at 2:00, we're going to, have a team building meeting. This is what it's going to look like. This is what our expectation is. And we don't want to single them out and necessarily just give the extra information to them. We want to maybe just send that out to the whole team so they don't feel singled out, but it's something that they really need, because now they can mentally prepare. Because believe it or not, when it comes to social functions, they really require some time to prepare, to mentally prepare. My son was diagnosed with ADHD when COVID started. He's 18 now, so he was 16 at the time. And he never struggled with school. He was always able to cope until they went online. And because, they didn't have a plan, they didn't really have a chance to formulate a great response. His high school went to a 4-quarter term, and each quarter, they took 2 subjects. They had a 3-hour class in the morning and a 3-hour class in the afternoon, online with teachers that, weren't really that savvy in online delivery. And it was fine as long as it was a topic that was of interest to him. But man, when he got to chemistry, that 3-hour chemistry class was kicking his butt. And he said, Mom, I just can't concentrate after 45 minutes. No matter what I do, I can't concentrate. So we had him tested, and sure enough, he's got ADHD. And then, so many things clicked in my mind. I couldn't figure out how he could memorize the stats of hundreds of Pokemon cards, but he couldn't remember to feed the cat. So things like that just sort of started to click for me. And I just, it all plays out. It plays out at home. It plays out in the workplace. And really I know for him, even when he was going to work, he had a part-time job. He didn't really love it. There wasn't great leadership there, and it wasn't a great job. And he was looking for another job, but he wouldn't tell me. He said, all the way to work, I'm mentally preparing myself to, be resilient in that environment. And it's just really important to set people up for success that way.
Yeah, a lot of what you mentioned in terms of setting neurodiverse folks up for success in the workplace, I think it also applies to many other people. Like, as an introverted leader, I would prefer to have notes and as many agenda items ahead of time so that I can actually prepare, then sit in the meeting and try to kind of think on the spot. So I think it does allow for many more people to be successful. And speaking of the environment that employers are creating, leaders are creating for neurodiverse folks, and even just underrepresented folks in the industry in general, how should we be thinking about managing employees to be successful and to create that successful relationship?
It always comes down to communication, although we have to make certain allowances. You may find that someone on the spectrum may want to look everywhere but your eyes when they're speaking to you. I mean, even just backpedaling here a bit to the interview process. I mean, that was one of the things in HR, eye contact was so important, right? It meant that they were someone that you could trust. And when it comes to autistic folks or even neurodivergent folks, they're uncomfortable with eye contact. And again, I'm speaking in generalities, but we have to make allowances for that. That doesn't mean that they're not going to thrive in the job. And just really concentrating on being inclusive, talk to people. It always comes down to communication, right? Always. And ask people how they want to communicate. One of the reasons I really dug into this topic is, one of my areas of expertise is workplace bullying and violence and harassment prevention. And what I was realizing and what I was hearing from neurodiverse folks is that they don't always have the awareness and recognize when they're raising their voice. They don't have the social acumen to know sometimes what they're saying is inappropriate. And so the best advice to that is, instead of being offended, pause a beat, formulate a response instead of a reaction, and ask them, this is what you said. Is this what you meant? And often when you do that, they don't want to hurt people. They'll say, no, that's not what I meant at all. I wanted to relay this message. And really just stopping and, like I said, just pausing a beat and giving them a chance to correct or change the behavior. Be patient with them. Let them know that what they said was inappropriate and why, and what maybe they could say differently to portray the same message that they're trying to get across. And from an HR perspective, really it's super important, especially when it comes to inclusion. And it's one of those things that we don't think about, right? We tend to paint people with the same brush, and they should know about tone and things like that. That was one of the things my son said to me. It would drive me crazy because, and I shouldn't even use that word. I'm going to backpedal on that. it would really bother me because he would speak to me in a tone that I found disrespectful. And when I called him on it, he'd say, I don't speak tone. And he would say it with that tone, but not realize that what he was saying was offensive. So I've learned a lot. And, since I've really sort of dug into this, is particularly with ADHD. I know now that his dad also has ADHD. I see it. I mean, he gets hyper focused on things and other things just kind of go undone or are half done. And, they're very, very good at what they're very, very good at. And they can learn and make allowances and do things that may not come as naturally to them, same as the rest of us.
Thank you so much for sharing all of those. And yeah, I mean, I think this really comes to when it comes to being more inclusive, it's about coming at things from a place of curiosity, right? And really realizing that, hey, in a workplace, we're most likely all here to produce a better product, or let's hope we're all here to like build an amazing thing or provide a wonderful service to somebody, right? And let's assume that like, hey, maybe if somebody comes at us with an inappropriate tone, maybe they didn't mean it that way, right? And I think especially, I really love the fact that you touched on not turning videos on, because I think, especially in an interview setting these days that it's remote, a lot of times there's this assumption that, oh, if the person isn't turning on their video, maybe it's because they're hiding something or they're not wanting to be as engaged. And so I'm curious, for somebody who maybe is neurodiverse and doesn't feel comfortable turning on their video, but it's kind of expected during some of these video interviews, what would you recommend that they might say potentially during the interview process to make sure that the company is aware that they actually really do care?
Well, ask them, are you comfortable with your camera being on? It's really just that simple. This stuff is not difficult. And like I said, it's those people that know best what it is they need. And, they're really going to appreciate that you've asked them that question and didn't assume. Because let's be honest, there are so many people on the spectrum somewhere who may, not even be aware that they're on the spectrum, who may be aware that they're on the spectrum, but not feel psychologically safe enough to let their employer know that they're on the spectrum because, of the stigma that is very real in our workplace. And, they might divulge that they're on the spectrum. And sometimes that leads to them being treated differently in a not so great way. And sometimes what will happen is when coworkers find out that they have divulged and it's been handled really well in the workplace, other people will come forward too and say, yeah, you know what, I've struggled with this, or I have an anxiety disorder, or, I have social anxiety, or I've got ADHD, or yes, I'm on the spectrum, or there's a history of mental illness in my family. It gives people permission to be themselves and bring their whole selves to work and not only be part of the team working towards a common goal, but be celebrated for their differences. We're really at a point where it's time to sort of refocus and reframe the way we do work, the way we do people, the way we do culture at work. We're in a perfect storm for reframing this dialogue and this conversation. We've got Gen Z and younger millennials who are, for the most part, really comfortable talking about mental health issues. And, we all have mental health. It's not something that, is just comes up when there's a problem. And they're going to feel supported if, they're asked how they're doing in an authentic way. We have an organizational phenomena right now where we're in a skills shortage that's showing up in tech in big ways. And I'm really excited actually for women in tech because, maybe this skills shortage is what it's going to take to really have women embraced within that field. We're in that global skills shortage. We've just come through a pandemic where everybody on the planet has been given an opportunity to really pause and reevaluate what it is that is important to them, how they want to do work, how they want to do life. It's really, like I say, just a perfect storm to be having this conversation. We're hearing about quiet quitting, we're hearing about the great resignation, and, really it's nothing new. It's just that the tolerances have changed.
Awesome. Well, Ruthann, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. This was so beneficial, and I personally learned so much. And we end each of our episodes with a Retaining WIT tip of the week. And I know you have a free gift that you wanted to share with our audience. So I wanted to give you a moment to let you tell our audience about it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Josie. I have a document, Top 3 Considerations to Create Effective Organizational Culture, that I would love to gift your audience. I know you have a link for that they can go in and get that resource. I also have a resource that I would like to share, although I don't have a link for it. So please reach out to me by email. It's Universal Design Principles, and it's about designing slideshows and designing team meetings and that kind of thing with intention towards inclusion of neurodiversity. It was actually created by Crystal Bowen, who of Delta Learning Solutions. Now, I brought her in. She's an autistic consultant. I am neurotypical, so I didn't want to certainly come into this as some sort of subject matter expert without getting the content vetted by someone who is a true expert, both lived experience and, the book learning. And so we have a document called Universal Design Principles that I would love to share as well. For those that are interested, please reach out to me by email at info@harmonytraining.ca. Please feel free to check out my website, harmonyintheworkplace.com. And I would love to hear from anybody who wants to dive into this. This was just very broad strokes. It's a very deep and broad topic. And I'm really happy to see you and folks like you really bringing it to the forefront of public awareness. So thank you for that.
Of course. And thank you for sharing these resources with our audience. We'll definitely be putting some of the links into the show notes so people can find all of that amazing content and reach out to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruthann. Thank you for joining us on Retaining WIT this week.
It was great having you, and be sure to join us for our next episode. All right. Goodbye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to the Retaining WIT podcast. You can keep up with our latest episodes at retainingwit.com, on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast shows.